Something powerful happens when a child of God seeks to know more about Him and His beloved Son. Nowhere are those truths taught more clearly and powerfully than in the Book of Mormon.
God always provides safety for the soul, and with the Book of Mormon, He has again done that in our time. Remember this declaration by Jesus Himself: "Whoso treasureth up my word shall not be deceived. And in the last days, neither your heart nor your faith will fail you."
Chapter 21, the people of Limhi. Limhi's people are smitten and defeated by the Lamanites. Limhi's people meet Ammon and are converted. They tell Ammon of the 24 Jaredite plates, about 122 to 121 BC. And it came to pass that Limhi and his people returned to the city of Nephi and began to dwell in the land again in peace. And it came to pass that after many days the Lamanites began again to be stirred up in anger against the Nephites. And they began to come into the borders of the land round about. So it's only been a year. It's only been, our last chapter ended at 123 BC, and now we're at 122 BC. So that whole peaceful exchange and the Lamanite king pleading for Limhi's people to his own people to preserve the people of Limhi, I hope that makes sense, that didn't last very long. It lasted about a year. Now they durst not slay them because of the oath which their king had made unto Limhi, but they would smite them on their cheeks and exercise authority over them, and began to put heavy burdens upon their backs and drive them as they would a dumb ass. So they didn't necessarily come and kill them and hurt them, but they just bugged them. They would be mean to them. They would hit them. They would put really hard things on them. It said smite them on their cheeks, like they'd hit them in the face. But they weren't killing them, so they weren't technically breaking the oath that the Lamanite king and Limhi had made. Yea, all this was done that the word of the Lord might be fulfilled. And now the afflictions of the Nephites were great, and there was no way that they could deliver themselves out of their hands, for the Lamanites had surrounded them on every side. And it came to pass that the people began to murmur with the king because of their afflictions, and they began to be desirous to go against them to battle. And they did afflict the king sorely with their complaints. Therefore he granted unto them that they should do according to their desires. And they gathered themselves together again, and put on their armor, and went forth against the Lamanites to drive them out of their land. And it came to pass that the Lamanites did beat them, and drove them back, and slew many of them. And now there was a great mourning and lamentation among the people of Limhi, the widow mourning for her husband, and the son and the daughter mourning for their father, and the brothers for their brethren. So the people had just had enough. Limhi's people are basically being abused, and they are getting tormented by the Lamanites. And Limhi's people come to King Limhi and just say, we've had it. We're sick of this. We just want to go battle. Can we just go to battle against them? And it says that they did afflict the king sorely with their complaints, that he basically was like, you know what, go ahead. Do whatever is according to your desires. Do what you want. And so they gathered themselves together, they put on their armor, and they went to go fight back against the Lamanites who were just tormenting them. And the Lamanites beat them and drove them back and killed many of them. And then it says that the people were so sad. The widow mourning for her husband, the son and the daughter mourning for their father, and the brothers for their brethren. This is all prophesied from Abinadi. And now there were a great many widows in the land, and they did cry mightily from day to day, for a great fear of the Lamanites had come upon them. So all these widows whose husbands had died were just terrified, because they didn't feel like they had any protection at all because their husbands were killed. And it came to pass that their continual cries did stir up the remainder of the people of Limhi to anger. And it came to pass that their continual cries did stir up the remainder of the people of Limhi to anger against the Lamanites. And they went again to battle, but they were driven back again, suffering much loss. So this is so hard. They're in this really heartbreaking cycle where they first got tormented by the Lamanites, and so they wanted to go battle. And they did, and the Lamanites killed a bunch of them. And then they were so sad and mournful. And then the continual cries of everybody that was so sad made people in Limhi's group want to go and fight again. So they went back again to fight, and more people were killed. It was a vicious cycle. And they went again, even the third time, and suffered in the like manner. And those that were not slain returned again to the city of Nephi. And they did humble themselves even to the dust, subjecting themselves to the yoke of bondage, submitting themselves to be smitten and to be driven to and fro, and burdened according to the desires of their enemies. And they did humble themselves even in the depths of humility, and they did cry mightily to God. Yea, even all the day long did they cry unto their God, that he would deliver them out of their afflictions. So they became a humble people. They were put down to dirt, to nothing. They lost so many of their family members and their friends, and they finally humbled themselves to the depths of humility and cried mightily to God all day long that he would deliver them. And now the Lord was slow to hear their cries because of their iniquities. Nevertheless, the Lord did hear their cries and began to soften the hearts of the Lamanites, that they began to ease their burdens. Yet the Lord did not see fit to deliver them out of bondage. I like that they say it that way. The Lord did not see fit to deliver them out of bondage. It's not saying that the Lord ignored them or that he left them alone to suffer. This is due to their own choices. This is what's happening to them. But the Lord knows the best plan. His plan is perfect. And he did not see fit at that point to deliver them out of bondage yet. And it came to pass that they began to prosper by degrees in the land, and began to raise grain more abundantly, and flocks and herds, that they did not suffer with hunger. Now there was a great number of women, more than there was of men. Therefore King Limhi commanded that every man should impart to the support of the widows and their children, that they might not perish with hunger. And this they did because of the greatness of their number that had been slain. So King Limhi asked all of the men that were left to go and help these other women, help all these women that have lost their husbands and all of these children that have lost their fathers. This was a very Zion-minded people. Now the people of Limhi kept together in a body as much as it was possible, and secured their grain and their flocks. And the king himself did not trust his person without the walls of the city, unless he took his guards with him, fearing that he might by some means fall into the hands of the Lamanites. And he caused that his people should watch the land round about, that by some means they might take those priests that fled into the wilderness, who had stolen the daughters of the Lamanites, and that had caused a great destruction to come upon them. For they were desirous to take them, that they might punish them. For they had come into the land of Nephi by night, and carried off their grain and many of their precious things. Therefore they laid wait for them. And it came to pass that there was no more disturbance between the Lamanites and the people of Limhi, even until the time that Ammon and his brethren came into the land. So we're almost catching up to where we were, because we came into this story with Ammon and his brothers coming and finding King Limhi. And now King Limhi is telling the story of what happened with his dad and his grandpa, Zeniff and King Benjamin. And he's trying to tell him, this is what happened. And so now we're almost caught up to where we started the story. Does that make sense? And the king, having been without the gates of the city with his guard, discovered Ammon and his brethren, and supposing them to be priests of Noah, therefore he caused that they should be taken and bound and cast into prison. And had they been the priests of Noah, he would have caused that they should be put to death. So they thought that Ammon and his brothers were the people, these priests of Noah, that had left their families and then kidnapped the Lamanite women. And so I'm sure they blamed them for a whole bunch of terrible things, but especially for these terrible relations between the Lamanites and the people of Limhi, the Nephites, because they're the ones that caused the battle, because they blamed the people of Limhi for taking these women that they did not take. So King Limhi's people were always looking for these priests of Noah that were just rogue somewhere. They're the ones that kidnapped the Lamanite daughters. And it even says in verse 21 that they are the ones that came by night and took a bunch of grain and precious things from the Nephites, from King Limhi's people. And so they were always looking out for the wicked priests as well as the Lamanites to come against them to battle again. So now we're caught up to when Ammon and his brothers come and meet King Limhi for the first time. And the king, having been without the gates of the city with his guard, discovered Ammon and his brethren, and supposing them to be the priests of Noah, therefore he caused that they should be taken and bound and cast into prison. And had they been the priests of Noah, he would have caused that they should be put to death. But when he found that they were not, but that they were his brethren, and had come from the land of Zarahemla, he was filled with exceedingly great joy. Now King Limhi had sent previous to the coming of Ammon a small number of men to search for the land of Zarahemla, but they could not find it, and they were lost in the wilderness. Nevertheless, they did find a land which had been peopled, yea, a land which was covered with dry bones, yea, a land which had been peopled and which had been destroyed. And they, having supposed it to be the land of Zarahemla, returned to the land of Nephi, having arrived at the borders of the land, not many days before the coming of Ammon. So when they found this land that was riddled with bones and desolation, they felt completely hopeless, because they were counting on the people of Zarahemla to save them. But then they saw all these bodies, all these bones everywhere, and they assumed that all of these people had been destroyed, that were the only ones that could save them. They had to turn to the Lord to save them, where they should have looked from the beginning, honestly. But that explains why they were so joyful, rejoiced just so much. And that explains why King Limhi was just full of joy when he saw Ammon and when Ammon explained who he was. And they brought a record with them, even a record of the people whose bones they had found, and it was engraven on plates of ore. And now Limhi was again filled with joy on learning from the mouth of Ammon that King Mosiah had a gift from God, whereby he could interpret such engravings, yea, and Ammon also did rejoice. So if you remember back in the book of Omni, where we read about King Limhi had this record, and he asked Ammon, once he knew who he was and knew who his brothers were, he said, "Can any of you translate this record? We have to know what happened to these people. We found this land of bones, all these bodies, all these people that had been killed, and I need to know what happened. We need to read this record." And he said, "Can any of you translate this record?" And Ammon said they couldn't, but King Mosiah could. Yet Ammon and his brethren were filled with sorrow because so many of their brethren had been slain. And also that King Noah and his priests had caused the people to commit so many sins and iniquities against God. And they also did mourn for the death of Abinadi, and also for the departure of Alma. And also that King Noah and his priests had caused the people to commit so many sins and iniquities against God. And they also did mourn for the death of Abinadi, and also for the departure of Alma, and the people that went with him, who had formed a church of God through the strength and power of God, and faith on the words which had been spoken by Abinadi. Yea, they did mourn for their departure, for they knew not whither they had fled. Now they would have gladly joined with them, for they themselves had entered into a covenant with God to serve him and keep his commandments. So, quick recap. King Noah wanted Alma killed. Alma and all of these people that Alma had taught the gospel to, based off what Abinadi taught Alma, and King Noah wanted them all killed, so they took off. And so right now, King Limhi is saying all the things that they're mourning, they're so sad about Abinadi being killed. They are so heartbroken about these sins and iniquities that his dad caused the people to commit. And he also is so sad that Alma left and all of Alma's people, because he said, we also entered into a covenant with God. We would love to be together. We would love to be together with Alma and with his people. He says they would have gladly joined with them, for they themselves had entered into a covenant with God to serve him and keep his commandments. And now, since the coming of Ammon, King Limhi had also entered into a covenant with God, and also many of his people to serve him and keep his commandments. And it came to pass that King Limhi and many of his people were desirous to be baptized, but there was none in the land that had authority from God. And Ammon declined doing this thing, considering himself an unworthy servant. So the one who we knew had authority at this point was Alma, because he was a high priest, which means that he had been ordained, but because he was not obedient, he didn't have the power. But now that he's repented, he has priesthood power and priesthood authority. And so King Limhi and many of his people wanted to be baptized, but they couldn't find anybody that had the authority from God to do that. Therefore, they did not at that time form themselves into a church, waiting upon the Spirit of the Lord. Now they were desirous to become even as Alma and his brethren, who had fled into the wilderness. They were desirous to be baptized as a witness and a testimony that they were willing to serve God with all their hearts. Nevertheless, they did prolong the time, and an account of their baptism shall be given hereafter. So they wanted to be baptized, but they put it off, hoping for somebody who had the priesthood authority to be able to baptize them. And now all the study of Ammon and his people and King Limhi and his people was to deliver themselves out of the hands of the Lamanites and from bondage. Chapter 22. Plans are made for the people to escape from Lamanite bondage. The Lamanites are made drunk. The people escape, return to Zarahemla, and become subject to King Mosiah, about 121 to 120 BC. And now it came to pass that Ammon and King Limhi began to consult with the people how they should deliver themselves out of bondage. And even they did cause that all the people should gather themselves together. And this they did that they might have the voice of the people concerning the matter. So they called everybody together, Ammon and King Limhi, and basically said, we got to come up with a plan. We need to escape, and we need to figure out how to do this. And it came to pass that they could find no way to deliver themselves out of bondage, except it were to take their women and children and their flocks and their herds and their tents and depart into the wilderness. For the Lamanites being so numerous, it was impossible for the people of Limhi to contend with them, thinking to deliver themselves out of bondage by the sword. So they knew, because the Lamanites were so numerous, there's no way they could fight them. So they had to take all of the women and the children and basically everything, all the animals, flocks, all their stuff out. They kind of felt like they had to do this in steps. Now it came to pass that Gideon went forth and stood before the king, and said unto him, Now, O king, thou hast hitherto hearkened unto my words many times when we have been contending with our brethren, the Lamanites. So Gideon says, King, you've actually taken my advice quite a bit. So hear me out. And now, O king, if thou hast not found me to be an unprofitable servant, or if thou hast hitherto listened to my words in any degree, and they have been of service to thee, even so I desire that thou wouldst listen to my words at this time, and I will be thy servant and deliver this people out of bondage. I really like Gideon. He had such a servant heart, and also wanted to kill King Noah. So he was really mad at King Noah too, but King Noah was a very wicked man. But I love Gideon's humility here as he's saying, King, if you've ever, anything I've ever said, if it's ever been helpful to you, please just hear me out now. Like, this is the time where I really need you to just hear my plan. And the king granted unto him that he might speak. And Gideon said unto him, Behold, the back pass through the back wall on the back side of the city. The Lamanites, or the guards of the Lamanites, by night are drunken. Therefore let us send a proclamation among all this people, that they gather together their flocks and herds, that they might drive them into the wilderness by night. And I will go according to thy command, and pay the last tribute of wine to the Lamanites, and they will be drunken, and we will pass through their secret pass on the left of their camp, when they are drunken and asleep. Thus we will depart with our women and our children, our flocks and our herds, into the wilderness, and we will travel around the land of Shilom. So Gideon has a pretty good plan. he says, at the back of this land, on the backside, there's a bunch of these Lamanite guards that their job is to guard and make sure that we're not doing anything that they don't want us to be doing, especially preparing for battle. And so he says, we give our tribute. We give half of everything that we have to the Lamanites. So we also give them wine. And he says, I will deliver this. I will take the last tribute of wine to these Lamanites, and it's going to be really potent alcohol wine. And he's saying we will get them drunk, and then we can just walk right past them. Thus we will depart with our women and our children, our flocks and our herds into the wilderness, and we will travel around the land of Shiloh. And it came to pass that the king hearkened unto the words of Gideon. So King Limhi was like, let's do it. Good plan. And King Limhi caused that his people should gather their flocks together, and he sent the tribute of wine to the Lamanites. And he also sent more wine as a present unto them. That was so nice of him. And they did drink freely of the wine, which King Limhi did send unto them. And it came to pass that the people of King Limhi did depart by night into the wilderness with their flocks and their herds, and they went round about the land of Shiloh in the wilderness, and bent their course towards the land of Zarahemla, being led by Ammon and his brethren. And they had taken all their gold and silver and their precious things which they should carry, and also their provisions with them, into the wilderness, and they pursued their journey. And after being many days in the wilderness, they arrived in the land of Zarahemla, and joined Mosiah's people, and became his subjects. And it came to pass that Mosiah received them with joy. So they did it. They took off. Gideon's plan worked. They got the Lamanites drunk, and they all literally walked right past them. And you know that the Lord helped them too. The Lord completely protected them on this journey. And they got everything that they could carry, and they went and joined Mosiah's people. And it said Mosiah received them with joy. And he also received their records, and also the records which had been found by the people of Limhi. And now it came to pass, when the Lamanites had found that the people of Limhi had departed out of the land by night, that they sent an army into the wilderness to pursue them. And after they had pursued them 2 days, they could no longer follow their tracks. Therefore they were lost in the wilderness. So these people, the Lamanites at this point, once they sobered up and realized what had happened, they went after them. And it said they looked for 2 days to try to find all these people, and they couldn't follow their tracks anymore. They don't know where they went. And then these people, the Lamanites, got lost in the wilderness.